Hi, and welcome to Blink Questions Answered. Over the past day, we've collected hundreds of questions and votes from you, getting your questions about Blink. And today we're going to be answering all the top questions with this panel. So as a matter of introduction, my name is Paul Irish, and I'm a developer advocate on the Chrome team. And we have a whole host of other really smart folks to answer these questions. So if we could introduce.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Darren Fisher. I'm engineering lead for the Chrome Web Platform team.
I'm Alex Komorowski. I'm a product manager on the Chrome Web Platform team.
My name is Eric Seidel. I'm a longtime Webkit contributor and now a member of the Blink team.
Great. So we're just going to go through from the top, the top questions that were submitted and voted up by everyone, and get some answers to some of the things that everyone's wondering about with the new Blink announcement. OK, so the first one that we have is from Peter Casting, and it's a three-parter, but I'll read it out right now. So, what will be the relationship between the Webkit and Blink codebases going forward? Will the Chromium port be removed from Webkit? Is there any policy or tooling to ensure that changes, either bug fixes and features, in one codebase migrate to the other?
So, yeah, I'll take that. There's no real formal relationship between the two teams. I expect that there'll be sharing of ideas and some patches, maybe more so in the beginning. In the beginning, it'll be easier to share patches. Over time, I expect that the two code bases will diverge, and it'll become, not as easy to share patches. As far as the removal of Chromium port from Webkit, that's really up to the Webkit project to figure out what makes sense for them. I expect that it'll be interesting to see how it evolves. I think there's people on both sides who care passionately about the web platform and the web platform implementations and that are in Webkit and in Blink, and people will be motivated to share ideas.
I should point out, too, that we already work with other browser vendors as well. Standards activities and informal discussions and just filing bugs and commenting in their bug databases, and I imagine this will be no different over time.
Great. OK, the next question is about availability. A lot of people were curious about this. So we had a question from Mihai in Bucharest and from a number of other people. So when will Blink ship on Canary? When will it be available in stable? How far along in development is it?
Yeah, so one thing that I want to emphasize is that at the very beginning, there's really nothing that different from Webkit. It's over time that they will evolve in different directions. So technically, today's Canary will be using Blink, but in reality, there's going to be no difference for web developers. Nothing that you can even see. The user agent, for example, will remain the same for the time being.
Right. So if you want, you can test out today's Chrome Canary builds. Blink is in it, but really it's basically the exact same as yesterday's Canary. So you won't have any big changes to deal with. OK, we'll move forward. What is the plan for transitioning the Webkit integrated in Android to Blink look like? So what's the story for the Chrome on Android and the stock Android browser?
Well, I think the story is very similar to the previous question. I mean, Chrome, going forward, will be using Blink instead of Webkit. That means Chrome on all platforms will be using Blink. The second part about that, the Android browser, well, that has to do with the product cycle for Chrome and Chrome on Android. As far as this team is focused on, we're just trying to make sure that Blink runs really great and is a great web rendering engine for Chrome on all platforms where Chrome can be found.
Yep. And I should point out that that Chrome on Android will essentially have Blink as of version 28. This is the same for Chrome on desktop. So 28 is the first Chrome release. It's in Canary right now, and it'll be in stable in about 10-ish weeks. Hopefully, we'll see.
I'm not sure when they will be pushing the next beta, but
right, yeah. But there's a Chrome on Android beta via the Play Store they can take a look at. I'm not exactly sure when it'll be there, but again, don't expect any big changes. It's the same code base for the most part. OK. There was in some of the documentation that came out yesterday, there was a point around some of the architectural changes that we're looking at. So one of them was, we said, we'd like to explore even larger ideas like moving the entire DOM into JavaScript. This has the potential to make JavaScript DOM access dramatically faster. Is there anything that we can elaborate on this kind of idea?
Sure. I'm happy to take that. So one of the things to understand is the document object model, the DOM, is implemented in a part we call WebCore, which is all C++. And when you, in your JavaScript page, access the DOM, your code has to leave the JavaScript virtual machine and enter into WebCore. There's a cost to that. And although it's pretty fast today, we'd like it to be way faster. And the way to make it way faster is for your code to not ever have to leave the JavaScript virtual machine, but instead be able to access the DOM directly. And to do that, we'd have to move the DOM into JavaScript. And it's just one of the many sort of crazy ideas that we're exploring in the future of Blink.
Yeah, crazy because it's not exactly an automatic win. There's pros and cons to any such change, and we are going to explore that and see what kind of benefits we can derive and what kind of opportunities can be had from such a crazy idea.
Oh yeah.
There are a lot of ideas on the project page. We're just collecting sort of a wish list of things that we want to look into and investigate. That now we can because we can change architectural boundaries if necessary and really dream big. So I think we're all really excited to try out a lot of these sort of crazy ideas and see which ones work.
Yeah. Another question that we had, this is from Greg again, something that was in the docs. This was around removing things. So we had a note in there around removing obscure parts of the DOM and making backwards incompatible changes to obscure parts that benefit performance or remove complexity. What can we share around this? I think, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I'm happy to take that as well. So this is actually a larger trend in the web platform right now. If you look at HTML5, HTML5 did a lot of work to try and remove some of the old crufty bits that were perhaps spec'd in HTML2 or 3, but haven't been used in 20 years. So a good example of this is the isIndex tag, which was an idea long ago and has now been replaced by a much simpler implementation in HTML5. And the same thing's true of these things called entity reference nodes, which exist technically in the DOM, but nobody's ever used. So we've been removing these out of WebKit and out of Blink as the specs have moved forward to also remove them.
Yeah, but we plan to do so very carefully and to ensure that we're not breaking or torturing web developers along the way. The idea is to identify the low-hanging fruit and clean up the platform if we can, and hopefully in a way that just moves the platform forward in a very positive way. Because over time, if you just keep accumulating features, the platform suffers.
Yeah. So we've been investigating, looking at, for example, through across the web with the search index, and seeing where these different features are being used. We published a few of those results. We're looking into that more because it helps us give us a better lens into what features are actually being used and how much of the risk there is in removing these. So certain features like isIndex, I mean, no one's using that. Yeah. But other ones it helps give us figure out which ones we can.
Yeah, and sometimes we have to do some work to help people migrate, some evangelism work and so on, because there can be some people stuck on an old way of doing something, and there's a new way that would be better.
And I guess some of that, taking a look at kind of the real world usage of CSS, whether the prefix DOM things, we've looked into this as a way to identify how we can responsibly deprecate things like prefixed CSS properties as well, right?
Absolutely. So we announced yesterday that we are going forward, we'll have a policy of no vendor prefixes, which is similar to what Mozilla is doing, a policy that they've adopted. There are, of course, a lot of legacy prefixes for stuff that we've inherited. And over time, on a case-by-case basis, we'll be investigating which of these we can just deprecate the prefix version because the non-prefix version works. Which ones are non-standard? Should those just be fully deprecated? Should they be standardized? Right. And really on a case-by-case basis, trying to work through this list. And ultimately, sometime in the future, getting to a point where hopefully there are no prefixes. But that'll take us some time to get to.
Yeah.
Because we have to do it responsibly so we don't break stuff.
The next question is, what will prevent the same collaborative development difficulties that hampered Webkit emerging in Blink as it gains more contributors and is ported to more platforms?
So the key comment here is porting. And actually, Blink will be built on a virtual platform, if you will, that doesn't require a lot of porting effort to bring it to new platforms. You can see already that Chrome runs on a variety of devices, from desktop down to embedded systems. And the point is that not a lot of work is required to move that code base across these different systems because, and this is all true because Chromium's sandboxed multiprocess architecture forced us to take away OS-specific integration from the web platform implementation, from Webkit. So we, over the course of time, developed this abstraction layer, this virtual platform on which Webkit's built. And going forward with Blink, that's the only platform that will support Blink, which means that it will be a very portable code base. We've already seen people having plenty of success taking Chromium's content layer, which is the multi-process embedding layer that will enclose Blink, and they've taken that to many other platforms and used it in many different sorts of applications, all without having to substantially fork or add code to Chromium. So we're really excited about the prospects of allowing a lot of people to participate on Blink and make use of it in new ways without having to torture the code base with a lot of if-defs or variations.
Yeah, Paul, you had a post a few weeks ago that I thought was amazing. I learned a lot from that post, actually. And you talked about how there are different layers in WebKit supporting model. You have to sort of bring a lot of things to the table, every platform you want to run on. And with Blink, in the content layer, it's sort of you get all this stuff just more easily. We have to implement it, a special version.
You get a cross-platform implementation of these things, and now it isn't like it's an atomic unit. There is some modularity to it, and allows people to subtract modules that they don't want to bring with them to their platform. But we strive in the Chromium project to not to modularize as opposed to using preprocessor directives to hack up the code base.
Is it would, say for instance, V8 and Skia, are those come along with the content layer of Chromium?
That's right. V8 and Skia are implied by this system. So Blink will depend on Skia for its graphics and V8 for its JavaScript engine.
And actually, that coupling allows us to potentially change those sort of the architectural layers, the way those interact, and optimize those.
Yeah, this is a really important point. I think both the Skia team and V8 team are both pretty excited about the opportunity to improve the integration of those libraries with the rendering engine. That's going to mean changes in those interfaces.
Great. Okay. Move on to the next question. Will the changes from Blink be contributed back to the Webkit project?
They're separate projects. Definitely when we forked Webkit from KHTML, we saw a lot of changes that got moved back and forth between the code bases because they began so similarly. And I would predict that similar effects will happen with Blink, but they are separate projects, they are separate code bases, and we don't have any plans currently to be moving patches.
But they're both open source.
They're both open source, and anybody can do that.
Yeah. And over time, of course, as they evolve in different directions, that will get harder and harder to do so. But at the beginning, especially, hopefully, it won't be too hard to be sharing back and forth.
Yeah, I think those watching the changelogs will see probably see some Googlers contributing some changes to Webkit certainly in the near term. I think over time that'll probably diminish.
Okay. The next question. Google said problems living with the WebKit 2 multiprocess model was a prime reason to create Blink. But Apple engineers say they asked to integrate Chromium's multiprocess into WebKit prior to creating WebKit 2 and were refused. What gives?
Right. So, yeah, it's true that Apple, shortly after launching Chrome, Apple expressed interest in our multiprocess layer that we had developed. I think it's important to understand that code base, the multiprocess layer, was fairly mature at that point. We had launched Chrome. We had developed a system that was very coupled into Chrome's architecture, Chrome's system, its way of doing stuff. It leveraged libraries that WebKit didn't use, and so on. And so for us, we viewed that opportunity to work with Apple on the multiprocess code as actually that sounded quite exciting to us. However, we saw that as a mountain of work, a large technically challenging engineering project for us, and because perhaps it's a matter of the timelines not being favorable, but we just didn't see a path forward that allowed us to contribute that code to WebKit.
But overall, I think what the teams ended up doing was collaborating really effectively within web core.
Yeah, so we focused on the parts on where we can maximize the benefit of working together with Apple, and that was sharing web core, the part that is a very sensitive part of the code base, where HTML is parsed, where the DOM is constructed, where CSS is used to render that DOM into web pages as we know it. That part of the web, which there was so much value in sharing that code that we did our best to build to streamline our way of using WebKit so that we could get as many developers focused on web core as possible and working with Apple. And I think it's been very successful. Going forward, I think, as we sort of hinted to, there's some significant changes that we want to make that we feel will affect the shape of web core, and in ways that the web core project and WebKit might not be ready to receive, and so we don't want to continue to heap on constraints, and so that's what leads us to where we are today. Do you guys have anything to add?
The reality is they're just very different architectures to serve very different needs, and the question of whether WebKit could have adopted our model or whether we would have adopted their model are questions comparing different timelines. One was 5 years ago, one was a year or two ago. So they're almost incomparable. But the reality is they're very different architectures, very different answers to perhaps similar questions, and we chose different paths. And we successfully collaborated in the WebKit project for the last 5 years, and it's been great. And I think we'll continue to collaborate with the WebKit project, but we've chosen different paths.
That's great. Okay. Is there anything that we can say around Android's WebView implementation and it adopting Blink?
So those following along in the Chromium project can see that there's been development of a WebView, Android WebView API on top of Chrome. And so, in the fullness of time when that comes to Android, then Blink will come to Android. I'm excited about that. I think it's great from our point of view of our team to help enable the use of WebView to be based on Chrome so that we can help make it better. Yeah. Have it be based on Blink means we can help make it be better. I'm excited about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Will Blink be able to support multiple scripting languages?
And I think our plan going forward, I think this is a reference to Dart, perhaps?
Yeah.
The Dart VM?
Yes.
And so it's important to understand that even today, you can go and get Dartium, which is a build of Chromium, uses the Dart VM. And the engineers working on that project have developed a patch that allowed them to add the Dart VM to WebKit in a way that wasn't terribly disruptive to WebKit. The reason why Dart VM is not in Chromium today doesn't really have to do with whether or not WebKit supports or Blink supports multiple VMs. It has a lot more to do with the timeline for the Dart itself and getting to the point where we feel like we can make a long-term or should make a long-term commitment to the Dart VM.
Yeah, I mean, we have very strong principles with Blink, especially about compatibility risk and making sure that we responsibly ship new features. And these are things that we're going to hold all features up to as we decide whether or not to ship them.
I mean, I think somebody made a really good point. I forget who it was, maybe one of the other engineers on the team. He said, whatever we do and whatever we put in Blink, it's got to fit on here. And so we can't just put everything in there just because it seems like a good idea. We have to validate that and be confident that we can stick with that decision and make a long-term commitment and build this platform responsibly. I mean, we don't want to have this relates to our whole strategy around deprecating APIs. We don't want to be in this situation where we have to deprecate APIs. So we don't want to add multiple different ways of doing the same thing. I think the web platform's famous for having multiple solutions to the same problem.
Yeah.
And we see that as a problem, and we have to be responsible to not create more of those problems.
Absolutely.
Yeah. This is a question from Spiffy Tech, how does the Chromium team expect this will affect the myriad of other browsers that have adopted WebKit?
So I should say, too, one thing just to start off is we fundamentally believe that having multiple rendering engines will help spur innovation and is ultimately good for the long-term health of the web. And so in that respect, I think it's actually very healthy for the whole ecosystem. So just to get started with that.
Yeah, no, I mean, and as a team, we're really focused on web standards, and sharing tests and helping this ecosystem of browsers all agree on what the web platform should be. But having multiple implementations is really valuable. Without that, developers are stuck maybe with the quirks of a particular engine, and that's not healthy for the platform. It's not great for developers, and as far as we can tell.
I hope, if anything, it just gives other browsers choice. Embedding WebKit is not comparable really to embedding Blink, because Blink requires the Chromium content layer. So you would embed the Chromium content layer if you wanted to embed Blink. But yeah, it just gives you choice.
Yeah. I think we covered this. Does this mean that Google stops contributions to WebKit? I think Eric.
I mean, Google contributed to WebKit before Chromium was announced, and I expect that Google will continue to contribute after.
Yeah, I think it's important just to say that, like, Google, we're not telling people they shouldn't contribute to WebKit. We're just telling them that, hey, feel free to focus on Blink. And
Chromium ships Blink. Or Chromium is going to ship Blink, and so the Blink team, or rather the Chromium team, is focused on Blink. But that doesn't mean that other parts of Google, or even parts of the Blink team, some of us are long-time WebKit contributors. I plan to post patches to WebKit. I expect other of my colleagues do too.
Yeah. What open source license will Blink have? Will it continue to support the H.264 codec?
So there's no relicensing happening as part of this fork.
What's the
It's a collage of licenses.
Collage, that's a good way of putting it.
The history of WebKit is that it's absorbed code from a variety of projects. I think a lot of it is BSD.
Yeah, BSD license. And LGPL.
Yeah. Okay. Will it continue to support the H.264 codec? That's really more of a Chrome question.
Blink doesn't know what codecs even exist. It doesn't have any. It has a box in which the video goes, and something outside of Blink makes the video go there. So Blink doesn't care or know.
Okay. We saw a lot of questions about this. People are curious about the user agent string. So will we see a Blink keyword in the user agent string, like KHTML, like Gecko?
We have no plans to change the user agent string. And going forward, in fact, there's a version number after Apple WebKit and Safari that at this point we have no plans to change that number. What will change going forward is just the number after Chrome. We, of course, lament the user agent string profusely, but we also see that any changes there have to be handled very, very carefully because, like it or not, people do all kinds of interesting string compares against it.
Yes, as you can tell from looking at anyone's user agent string, I mean, they're crazy. Yeah. I should say too, I mean, this is the kind of thing that ultimately, if we revisit this, which I'm sure at some point we'll be doing it on Blink Dev, the open mailing list, and this will be definitely a discussion that we take care of if we come to it.
I think it was a couple years ago that there was a successful effort to trim out a few bits of the user agent strings. So we certainly will be looking for opportunities. I would love to see this user agent string just be simplified radically, but it's hard to say when or if that'll happen.
Right.
Yeah. Just don't want to break the web.
Don't want to break the web.
Don't break the web. That's important.
It's a goal. When we'll be able to test the first versions of Blink? So again, this is available
today.
Blink is available in Chrome Canary as of today. And
you can build it yourself. This question was asking about Blink and Chromium as well, and you can just build it yourself.
We had some tireless infrastructure engineers who stayed up all night making that true. But
I was watching Blink Dev this morning. I think people have succeeded in building it, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So we've got, at this point, we're just focusing.
We have taken patches already.
Oh, great. That's
great.
So Blink is up and running today. You can build it today, and I believe the Chromium Canary tomorrow is likely to have Blink in it.
Cool.
Another thing I just wanted to ask about this, I believe that, so if anyone wants to watch, a lot of people are used to watching kind of change sets come in on the WebKit side. To do the same on Blink, we have a similar way of doing that.
We do have URLs. I don't know them off the top of my head.
We do, and I think it's on the project page.
Yeah.
And our goal is for everyone to be able to watch this and watch all the discussions and bugs and everything. And so if there is something where it's hard to follow along, we want to make that easier for people. So
the easy way to answer that is to join Blink Dev at chromium.org, or to join the #Blink channel on Freenode. we've also talked about having an IRC-based commit bot, just like the Webkit project does, where it tells you what the commits as they come in. So, but that's the way to answer that question, is to join one of our mailing lists or our IRC.
Yeah. And all that information is available on chromium.org/blink, where you can see our current mailing lists, a link to where all the change sets are coming in, where you can browse them, and everything else.
One thing too is so watching the change sets and all this stuff is takes a lot of effort for a lot of web developers.
Yeah.
And one thing that we're doing is, especially recently, we're getting better at having summary posts. And so we do that about for every beta release now for Chrome. And so those sort of summarize what things we enabled, which things are now behind a flag, which prefixes we've deprecated. That's a great way for web developers to follow along, where you don't have to be reading every single commit that's going through. And ChromeStatus.com is also great. And we're going to be Max and Eric, who were just talking on Blink Dev, they have plans to make that into more of a full-featured dashboard, which is really cool.
Great. Yeah. So ChromeStatus.com lists out kind of all the various features of the web platform that are in discussion these days, lists out kind of what their implementation status is, and also what kind of their standardization status is across kind of the browser ecosystem.
I love if you haven't looked at it, you should look at it. It's really interesting to get a snapshot of.
Yeah, we all had like this idea in our head of what it might look like, but then to actually see it.
Oh wow, it's very interesting.
Yeah,
It's very interesting.
it's a great like snapshot of kind of like the web ecosystem in one view, and we've already actually been getting some great contributions from Adobe over the past 2 days, just to
and others as well. I think we got a few guys from Mozilla actually also helped us as well. So the goal is to have that be sort of a snapshot of the health of the state of the web ecosystem, specifically Chromium, but over time, it could be for the whole web ecosystem. I think that's cool. So we'll see.
Great. Next question: how will this impact Dart language's process? Can we expect a Dart VM to be integrated in Chrome as a result?
I guess sort of already answered the question, but I think it doesn't really impact Dart language at all.
Dart's a separate open source project.
Yeah.
I don't think our changes to our open source project really affect them directly.
Right. When can we get our hands on Blink code? Again, today?
Today? Now?
Right now?
Yesterday? Yep. We're good. Will this be a direct competitor against Mozilla's new engine? Is co-working with Mozilla out of the question? Why?
Well,
The engine I believe they mean is Servo.
Servo.
Mm-hmm.
Which, although Brendan posted about it yesterday, it's been in the public for a long time.
Yeah, I remember reading design docs about that even a year ago.
Well, I've been following it for a while. It's
Yes.
very, very cool what they're doing.
Really cool ideas.
But I don't see Blink as really a direct competitor.
Blink is an iteration from Webkit.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a fork of Webkit. Servo is a new rendering engine constructed from
I mean,
scratch.
according to their docs, it's an experiment. The docs say that they may not actually ever ship. So that's a very different kind of project than, say, Blink or Webkit, which is really about
a shipping product.
Well, it's about an iteration. One of Webkit's goals was Webkit is not a science project. We're about shipping a product today. And the reality is the world and the web ecosystem needs both kinds. We need exploratory, crazy new things, and we also need to just ship something today.
Yep.
And Blink is about shipping today.
I think we're all really excited to see some of those ideas they're trying, because we're trying to dream big with our wish list of things to try.
Sure.
They're dreaming even bigger because they're building a new one from
Which
scratch.
is amazing.
And so that would be really cool to see which of those really big ideas work and which ones.
I'm
can
sure there'll be a lot
emulated.
of idea sharing.
Absolutely. It's really-
And
it's really
I mean,
cool.
I can see the Mozilla offices from my window.
Yeah.
And we talk to Mozilla guys, with some frequency, and
absolutely.
I think of them as very cooperative,
Yeah.
less
Absolutely.
competitors.
Yeah.
Do they know you can see them from
I'm not
The buildings are right next to
Well,
each
yeah,
other.
the buildings are right
we
next to each
discussed,
other.
actually, we discussed this with some folks from Mozilla. They were visiting a few days ago in the offices. Yeah, talked about the fact that we could see them.
That's great. So the next question is about vendor prefixes. When will existing vendor prefixes in Blink be phased out?
So I think I already touched on this as part of an earlier question, but so again, going forward, no new vendor prefixes, but we, of course, there are a number of legacy ones that we've sort of inherited.
And it could take a long time to
It could
deprecate
take a
those.
long time because we want to do it responsibly. We want to figure out. We don't want to break the web. So some of them are. It's just like, oh well, there's been the unprefixed version for years and years and years, and no one's using it. The prefix version, go ahead and take that out. Other ones are things that were never standardized, and that we want to either figure out: should we just deprecate these, or should we take these to standardization? But it's going to be a case-by-case basis. Really.
I think this really hits on the point, and the reason why we don't want to do vendor prefixes anymore is because vendor prefix or not, when you add something to the platform and you ship it, you can get stuck with it.
Absolutely.
And it becomes part of the platform.
Absolutely.
And so adding vendor prefixes just makes a big old mess. It doesn't actually seem to add any value.
Yeah.
And standards bodies have even discussed the idea of needing to standardize WebKit prefixed features, which feels crazy to me, but may need to happen if we fail to be able to remove these.
Yeah,
That's right.
It's crazy. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. But
So there will be no blink prefix.
There will be no blink prefix.
no blink prefix.
The madness must stop.
Good. I saw a request actually that we would maybe support dash blink text decoration blink. Is that
I'm pretty sure we will not be doing that.
okay?
Maybe behind an enable flag just for fun? No.
Someone was joking. I think it was, I forget who it was, but they started joking that with web components, actually, someone could make an x-blink tag if they really wanted to, their own version one. But
Yep.
yeah, so,
Yes.
but we will not ship the blink tag. That's for sure.
Okay. I think that can wrap it up for now. Appreciate everyone for submitting questions, voting them up. Hope we answered a lot of your questions. We'll be posting this video along with our content already out there. So if you haven't checked it out, chromium.org/blink kind of gives an overview of the entire project, our kind of policies towards adding features, and then the developer FAQ answers a lot of other questions that go along with these ones. So I encourage you to check that out, and I think that'll wrap it up.
That's good.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys, very much for joining us.